wrap up another incredible week, Baruch Hashem, of learning a little bit about Tefillah each and every day. And we begin a new chapter. This is really the first chapter in the Sefer, although for us it's been the third. We had the introduction, we had the Pirkei Psicha, and now today we continue with the first chapter, which is called Ha-Ha-Chana, the preparation for Tefillah. And today, in Mirz Hashem, we're going to answer the $1,000,000 question, Lama kashe kol kach lechavi? Why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult? And Rav Shimshon Pincus was writing this 30, 40 years ago. It's probably all the more so nowadays where our minds are in 4 billion different places. So why is it so hard to be mechavin? Why is it so hard to have intent when we daven? So says Rav Shimshon Pincus, you know what the yisoid, the foundational idea of Kavannah, u'schus aliv v'tefillah, you know what it all has to do with? Hachana shelifneh. The preparation that you do before it. And he says, you know how important this is? The Rambam writes that what is Kavannah? What does Kavannah mean? What does intent mean? Kavannah means, it says the Rambam, that you picture yourself as if you're Oimid Lifnei Hashchina. You're standing in front of Hashem, and therefore, says the Rambam, you need to be masha, wait a little bit before you start davening in order to have this Kavannah. And the Shulchan Aruch writes, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Sadi Gimel writes, before you start davening, you should wait a little bit in order to have Kavannah. Says Rav Shimshon Pincus, what we just learned was a Rambam, was a Shulchan Aruch. That's halacha. That's not musar. That's not inspiration. That's not something nice. That's a binding letter of the law for each and every Jew. So what do we see? We see that hachana, preparation, pausing for a few moments before we daven, is not just a good tool to aid and increase our prayers, but rather it is fundamentally obligatory on each and every God-fearing or any level of Jew, inherent in the tefillah, in the prayers, is to pause, is to wait, is to have some level of achana, of preparation for our davening. And he takes this one step deeper. And he says, now we can understand that you show up to davening, as we spoke about, you're bound by time, and you come a minute or two late, and you're running. So you're doomed before you start. You're going to try to have Kavannah, you're going to get to Shemana Esrei, you're flying, and you're going to try to pause, and you try to think, and you try to focus on what you're saying, and you try to clear your mind. It's too late. The Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, they all taught us already that the way to do it is to, before you start, have that element of achana. Without that, it's not going to happen. And now he goes even one step deeper. And he proves from the Gemara in Brachos that in reality, parts of Tefillah are called achana, which is something that we will deal with. But he says as follows, what does hachana do? What does preparing for prayer do? He says what it does is, it draws you close to Hashem. The act of hachana, those few moments of thought, of contemplation, of clearing our mind before we daven, those thoughts are in a way drawing us and bringing us closer to the King. And the example he says is, imagine one who is beloved by the King, he comes to the palace and he knocks on the door. And you know what happens? The king starts walking to the door and he walks away before the king gets there. The next time you try to talk to the king, he's not going to be there for you. So he says the same thing. When we're coming, we have to walk up to that door. We have to go and knock on the door. We have to let the king allow us to come in. The hachana is the act that brings us close, that opens the door, and that brings us into the inner chambers. Now that we're standing in the inner chambers, now we can daven Shemana Esrei. Now we could talk to the king. And now we can understand, as he says, when we're having a conversation face to face, it's very easy to talk. Why? Because there's nothing blocking us. Whereas if I'm on one side of the room and you're on the other side of a football field with 100,000 people in between us and a football game and music and everything going on, and we're going to try to have a long distance conversation, that's going to be pretty difficult because there's so many things breaking up our words. Says Rav Shimshon Pincus, what we're learning today is that the act of achana, of preparing those few moments of thought, are in a way drawing us close and removing all those barriers and obstacles and making it the face-to-face conversation that Tefillah is supposed to be. We'll pick it up from this point next week. B'siyata d'ishmaya.